Under the bright Australian suns, Melbourne Zoo looked like a place where families came to laugh, relax, forget the world for a while. But deep inside the primate complex, past the colorful signs, past the chattering crowds, past the glass that separated come from something far older, lived a creature every keeper feared to approach. His name was Makanu, and for years, he had been known by a different title, the gorilla no one dared to believe could ever be saved. Visitors never stayed long at his enclosure. Some didn't even realize a gorilla lived there. The shack swallowed him too well. Others stayed only long enough to witness the kind of moment that made people pull their children close. A sudden charge of viewing window. A violent hammer fist against the reinforced glass. A roar so deep it felt like the floor vibrated. No matter how thick the barrier, people always stepped back, the same pale look like they just glimpsed something that should have stayed hidden in the wild. Keepers whispered that Oak wasn't simply angry. He was unpredictable, unsteady, like a storm that never completely stopped. 1 second, he was motionless in the dark. The next, he erupted with a fury that scraped at old scars he carried across his knuckles and shoulders. Scars no one had the full story for, scars that didn't come any fight within the truth. Scars that looked like someone somewhere had once tried to break him. Every new employee received the same warning. Makanu was a high-risk case. Don't get close. Don't make sudden movements. Don't assume calm means safe. And above all, do not attempt contact, not even through glass. They said he had been transferred years early from a fake wildlife park up north. One of those makeshift places shut down after complaints of cruelty, understaffing, and chaos. Records from that facility were incomplete, and no one could get a clear picture of what Makanu had lived through. The documents that did survive were vague, impersonal agitation, non-compliant, words that protected the humans who wrote them more than the gorilla forced to endure whatever happened there. But staff had worked with animals long enough recognized the persons, the quick shallow breaths, the way flinched at metal sounds, the way he recoiled whenever objects were passed too quickly near him, not fear of being hurt, anticipation of it, as if his body still remembered blows that no longer came. And so Makanu lived in a strange limbo, too dangerous to integrate the other gorillas, too traumatized to trust the only caregivers trying to help him. Days turned into years, and Melbourne Zoo kept him safe as best they could, but everyone sensed it. That quiet, unsettling truth that clung to every wall of his enclosure. Moke wasn't living here. He was surviving here. The public rarely saw the full picture. They saw outbursts, violent, sudden, terrifying, but they didn't see what kept her. When crowds moved on, and Moke retreated back into the furthest corner, sinking into a darkness so deep the cameras nearly lost him. When he stopped moving entirely for long stretches, his breath the only proof he hadn't simply willed himself out of existence. Keepers watched from behind the safety glass, feeling helpless, unsettled. His silence was heavy, suffocating, as though something inside him had shut down long ago. But the mystery wasn't just in the silence. It was in the moments that didn't fit the pattern at all. Night cameras occasionally triggered in Makanu's enclosure, sometimes at hours when every other animal slept. Keepers expected to see pacing or aggression, but what they saw stuck with them, haunting in a way no one could quite explain. Moke standing perfectly still, staring at nothing. Moke reaching one massive hand to the moonlight window, as if searching for something that wasn't there. Moke barely audible through the microphones. Low rhythmic sounds that didn't resemble anger, but something like yearning. No one could explain why a gorilla who spent his days raging would spend his nights behaving like a ghost, searching for a past he couldn't touch. Whispers spread among the staff. Was Moke remembering something? Had he been trained her condition? Was this aggression his shield or his prison? The more they watched, less certain anyone felt that the gorilla they feared was simply dangerous. Instead, he seemed like an unanswered question, one wrapped in muscle grief and something darker, deeper, harder to name. Willow, the senior keeper with 2 decades of experience, was the only one brave enough to say others avoided. He.S. not just angry. He.S. carrying something we haven't uncovered yet. Something he can't let go of. She spent hours reviewing the old footage, scribbling notes, trying to piece together what trauma left a creature half alive during the day and restless at night. But every clue ended in the same unnerving conclusion. Whatever happened to Makanu before reaching Melbourne Zoo was far worse than anyone had imagined. Some nights Lauren would find herself unable to shake the image of Moke's eyes, dark, hollow, unfocused, like the light inside him had burned out a long time ago. She wondered if any part of him still hoped for something different, or if hope had been beaten out of him the same way his trust once had. Then there were the visitors. Occasionally a child would wander too close to the window, squealing with excitement, and Makanu would explode from the darkness like a force of nature, slamming his fists against the glass with a violence that made even adults jump. Parents dragged their children away, shaking their heads. That one is gone, some muttered, lost to anger. But anger wasn't the right word. Not to the few who saw beyond it. Moke moved like someone trapped, not just in steel and safety protocols, but in memories and instincts he didn't know how to escape. His aggression wasn't random. It was a language and no one knew how to translate it. And so the keepers did what they could: enrichment toys. He ignored soothing sounds that failed, carefully monitored schedules that didn't reach the places inside him that had been bruised and broken long before he arrived. Until one day, a day that began like any other, a girl not old enough to understand fear would walk up to his enclosure, raise her hand toward the glass, and do something that would stop the entire zoo in its tracks. Before that moment arrived, no one had any reason to believe Moke could ever change. But everything in his, every scar across his chest, every secret behind his midnight humming, every shadow he disappeared into, was leading quietly, inevitably, to the second he would meet a little girl named Emma, and the world would witness something no expert had ever predicted. Emma's class moved through Melbourne Zoo like a bright, noisy wave. Little bodies rushing from one enclosure to the next, squealing at colorful birds and pointing excited at swing gibbons. Teachers tried to maintain order, calling instructions over the hum of excitement. But field trips were their own kind of chaos. And today was no different. Children pressed against railings, scattered crumbs from their lunches, tugged at backpacks, and shouted questions faster than adults could answer them. It was the sort of cheerful disorder Moke normally wanted nothing to do with. And on this morning, as the group approached the primate complex, he made that clear. Before the teachers could even caution the children, Moke barreled out of the shadowed corner of his enclosure, slamming his weight against the reinforced glass with force that made the metal frame groan. Screams erupted instantly. Several children jumped back, clutching their chests, faces pale. A teacher shouted for everyone to move along. The crowd scrambled away, more shaken than hurt. And within seconds, the walkway cleared, leaving only the lingering echo of Moke's fists still ringing inside the exhibit. Most of the children kept their distance, whispering nervously as they hurried toward the next habitat. They didn't want to be anywhere near the angry gorilla. And for good reason. Makanu's charges were the kind that splintered the nerve endings of adults, let alone 7-year-olds. Within moments, the entire class had drifted forward, their attention pulled toward playful meerkats and bright flamingos. All except one child. Emma stood a few feet away from where the others gathered, watching the empty enclosure window with an expression that didn't match the fear written across the faces of her classmates. Her features were soft, templated, almost puzzled, like she sensed something the others had missed. While everyone else focused on the threat Makanu represented, she stared at the place where he had vanished, her eyes tracking the faint hint of movement in the shadows. Her teacher called for her to join the group, but Emma didn't move. She didn't step forward, didn't hurry away like the other children. Instead, she drifted back toward the glass, her small shoes barely making a sound on the concrete. She pressed her lips together, eyes searching the darkness behind the thick viewing window. From inside the observation room, Willow saw her. She tensed immediately, ready to intervene. The last thing she wanted was another charge. But something strange happened. Moke did not reappear in a burst of rage. No fist struck the glass. No roar thundered out from the enclosure. Instead, Lauren saw the gorilla shift barely perceptibly. A low, cautious movement that seemed to defy everything she knew about him. He wasn't approaching in a frenzy. He was watching. For a creature famous for his hostility, that simple stillness felt unsettling, almost eerie. Moke's dark eyes glinted through the glass, tracking Emma with a focus that's far too controlled to be instinct alone. Lauren felt the hairs on her arms rise. Moke should have been pacing, agitated from the earlier encounter. Yet here he was silent, alert. His heavy breaths steady rather than aggressive. Emma edged closer, not recklessly, but with the quiet confidence of a child who had not yet learned to judge danger by reputation. She approached the glass carefully, as though coming near a wild animal was something she'd been doing all her life. She stopped just inches from the window and stood there, not waving, not shouting, not tapping. She simply existed in front of him, calm and curious, with her small hands hanging loosely at her sides. Then she lifted one of those hands slowly and deliberately, placing her palm against the glass. The moment stretched in a way that made time feel strange. Even the air seemed to pause. Lauren's breath hitched. She considered hitting the alarm, calling for backup, shouting for Emma to step away. Every instinct told her this was the kind of moment that could go horribly wrong. But another instinct, a quieter one, told her to wait. Moke leaned forward, not fast, not sudden, but with an almost fragile hesitation, as though he was unsure whether he was allowed to come closer. He emerged further from the shadows, the massive shape of his frame growing clearer until his face aligned with Emma's. His nostrils flared, his eyes softened in a way Lauren had never witnessed before. And then, in a motion so gentle it felt unreal, Makanu raised one enormous hand and placed it against the glass direct opposite Emma's. Lauren covered her mouth, her heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't behavioral curiosity. This wasn't aggression masked as interest. This was something far more intimate, more startling, more human than anyone in that building had anticipated. It lasted only 5 seconds, maybe less, but those seconds felt monumental. The enormous hand of a gorilla, notorious for unpredictable rage, hovered perfectly still, palm pressed against the exact place where Emma's tiny hand rested. Emma stared at him with wide eyes, not frightened, but transfixed, as if she alone understood that something important was happening. Then Moke exhaled a low, trembling sound that wasn't a growl or a threat. It was almost like a sigh. His hand slipped away. He backed into the shadows again, disappearing as quickly as he had emerged. Emma didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply lowered her hand, took one small step back, and whispered something Lauren couldn't hear through the glass. When her teacher finally called her name with urgency's voice, turned and walked away calmly, rejoining her class as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But extraordinary didn't begin to cover it. Within minutes, staff crowded around the security monitors, replaying the footage again and again. They watched Moke's approach, the precision of his movement, the almost reverent way he touched the glass. They watched Emma standing still, fearless and unshaken. Her hand lifted, as if offering something no one else had managed to give him. A connection, a moment of recognition, a shocking, undeniable break in the pattern of everything they believed Makanu was capable of. They analyzed every frame, searching for explanations. Instinct, coincidence, misinterpretation. Yet, none of the theories matched what they had seen. It didn't look random. It didn't look accidental. It looked deliberate. It looked like the beginning of something they didn't yet understand. And for the first time in years, Melbourne Zoo felt a ripple of something unexpected, an emotion had long felt impossible around Makanu. Hope. For days after the incident, the zoo carried an energy that no one could fully explain. An undercurrent of disbelief, curiosity, and a lingering sense that something monumental had happened behind the glass of the primate complex. Staff whispered out Moke the new tone, no longer speaking of him, only as a dangerous outlier, but as a creature had shown a flash of gentleness no one knew he possessed. Yet, no one understood the moment well enough to predict what might happen next. Even Willow, who had watched the footage more than anyone, struggled to make sense of the bond she had witnessed. All she knew was that Makanu's eyes, usually cold and unfocused, had held something alive when they met Emma's, something she hadn't seen before, something she feared might vanish just as quick as it had appeared, but it didn't vanish. The following week, Emma returned with her mother, not as part of a school trip, but because she had insisted on coming back. Her mother, Bella, hesitated, at first, uneasy about bringing her little girl anywhere near Makanu's enclosure again. But Emma insisted in that quiet, determined way she always had, saying only that she needed to check on him. Bella had no explanation for the sense of responsibility her daughter felt toward a gorilla, but she brought her anyway, hoping this visit would put the curiosity to rest. Instead, it deepened it. The moment Emma rounded the corner into the primate viewing area, Moke appeared not with the jolting intensity he was known for, but with a slow, deliberate approach that unsettled everyone. He emerged from the far shadows and walked directly toward the window, stopping just a few feet from where Emma stood. It was as if he had been waiting for her. The keepers inside the observation room froze, unable to look away. Emma didn't hand to the glass this time. She simply looked at him. Makanu's breathing slowed, his massive chest rising and falling with a strangely steady rhythm. His face, so often tense and hardened, seemed softer around the edges. His eyes tracked Emma's focus, not suspicion. When she tilted her head slightly, he mirrored her. When she shifted her weight, he shifted, too. It wasn't mimicry out of fear. It was something that resembled communication. That was the moment everything changed. In the days that followed, Emma returned again and again. Sometimes she came with her mother, sometimes with her father, sometimes with both. She always approached quietly, never drawing attention to herself, never trying to provoke a reaction. But she didn't have to. Moke always noticed her long before she reached the window. He would rise from wherever he rested, shuffling closer to the glass and lowering himself until his face aligned with hers. He watched her with an intensity that was strangely peaceful, almost reverent. Behavioral specialist Harold began documenting Makanu's reactions with increasing fascination. He took notes on posture, vocalizations, hand movements, and breathing patterns, trying to map the change scientifically. But even he admitted privately that no data point could fully explain what was unfolding. Makanu, who had once responded to any human presence with hostility, seemed to soften in Emma's presence in ways that defied everything in his history. One afternoon, Emma arrived with a sketchbook tucked under her arm. She sat cross-legged in front of the enclosure, flipping a page with drawn Makanu in black pencil, broad shoulders, sunken eyes, heavy brows. It wasn't a childish doodle. It was surprisingly accurate, filled with gentle shading and thoughtful lines. When she held it up to the glass, Makanu leaned closer, nostrils flaring. His gaze swept the page slowly, then returned to Emma. He touched the glass with his knuckles, tracing the space where the drawing rested on the other side. The keepers, watching from the control room, exchanged stunned glances. Moke had interacted with enrichment items before, barrels, puzzle feeders. But he had never shown interest in anything visual. Here he was studying a child's drawing as though trying to understand the meaning behind it. None of this meant Moke had transformed into a calm gorilla overnight. He still startled He still reacted aggressively to sudden noises or unfamiliar crowds. But between those moments, something new was emerging. He began approaching the front of the enclosure more frequently. He sat in open view rather than burying himself in the darkest corners. His chest-beating episodes decreased. His pacing lessened, and then another unexpected behavior surfaced. Emma had a habit of humming while she waited soft melodies without words quiet enough that keepers almost didn't notice at first. One evening, as she sat humming a gentle tune, Makanu began to make a low sound deep in his throat. A resonant vibration that matched her rhythm almost perfectly. It wasn't a growl nor a warning call. It sounded like an attempt to join her. When Emma paused, Makanu continued to hum for seconds, then stopped as if wait for her to begin again. She did, he answered. It was the first time anyone had heard Moke attempt vocalization that wasn't tied to fear or agitation. The team spent that night reviewing the sound clips, listening to improbable duet with disbelief and something dangerously close to joy. The connection between them was undeniable, now risky, fragile, but real. Keepers began adjusting Makanu's enrichment schedule to support the new behavior. They introduced calming scents, lavender for relaxation, eucalyptus for stimulation. Instead of ignoring them, Makanu sniffed carefully and often settled near the diffuser closest to the front viewing pane. They provided new textured objects, branches, woven mats, bamboo segments. He manipulated them, rolling them across the floor, sometimes bringing them to the window when Emma arrived, as if presenting a gift. He had never done anything like that for anyone else. Emma didn't always understand the science behind what was happening. She didn't analyze Moke's behavior or chart his progress. She simply sat with him in her steady, patient way, letting him take the lead. Some days they exchanged movements like a quiet dance. Emma lifting her hand, Makanu following. Emma tilting her head, Maka mirroring. Other days they simply sat side by side, separated by glass, but linked by a kind of presence that didn't need words. And inside the observation room, the staff learned something, too. Makanu wasn't changing because he was being trained or corrected or conditioned. He was changing because for the first time in his life, someone saw him without fear, without judgment, without demand. Someone sat with him not to fix him, not to study him, but simply to be with him. Emma's gentle consistency, carved as space Makanu, had never been offered a place where connection was forced, where safety didn't come with conditions, where presence itself was the only requirement. And as that bond deepened day by day, the staff who had once believed Moke unreachable began to realize that they had been wrong. Something was unfolding within him, fragile, profound, and impossible to ignore. A bond that defied every assumption, every caution, every rule in a book. A bond that should never have existed. But it did, and it was only just beginning. In the weeks that followed, Moke's transformation continued in ways no one dared predict. His aggression had not vanished, but its sharp edges dulled. His pacing became less frantic. His gaze, once hollow and guarded, now softened when Emma approached. Yet, even with these changes, every keeper understood that trauma had a way of sleeping beneath the surface, waiting for the wrong sound or memory to wake it. And when the storm arrived, the kind that rolled across Melbourne with a violence that made the ground tremble, those buried memories did exactly that. The morning had begun quietly enough. A drizzle hung in the air. The clouds layered in thick gray sheets that promised something heavier. Weather alerts buzzed on staff phones, warning of severe thunderstorms by afternoon. Most animals sensed the shift long before the rain began. Birds perched lower. Lemurs retreated to the warm corners of their habitat. Even the lions paced anxiously, throwing their voices into the sky with low, uneasy roars. By noon, the temperature dropped sharply. Wind tore at the treetops. The first distant rumble of thunder vibrated a warning through the zoo's pathways. Visitors crowded under awnings, hurried toward the exits. Teachers heightened their field trip lines. Families lifted toddlers into their arms. Chaos moved through the public spaces. But the real storm, the one that mattered most, was building behind the glass of the primate complex. Moke felt it before anyone else. He stood in the center of his enclosure, shoulders raised, breath rapid. His nostrils flared as searching the air for something familiar and frightening. Then the sky cracked open with a roar. A bolt of lightning split the horizon, and the world went white for half a heartbeat. Moke lunged backward, crashing into the wall of his habitat. Willow, watching from the monitoring station, jumped to her feet. It had been years since they'd seen a reaction like that from him. Not fear in the simple sense, but pure instinctive terror. His eyes darted wildly. His palms slammed the ground. He beat his chest once, twice, then retreated into the darkest corner, trembling in a way that stabbed through Lauren's chest like a blade. She knew exactly what she was looking at. This wasn't anger. This was memory. Thunderstorms in his previous facility had often signaled screaming panic, chaos, and now, with the storm rolling in full force over Melbourne, the past clawed its way out of him as though it had been waiting years for this very moment. Close the viewing area, Harold ordered as the next crack of thunder shook the primate wing. Now if visitors come near, he could hurt himself. Lauren reached for the lockdown controls, her fingers trembling. She had expected worse days, regressions, setbacks, but not like this. Not this violent, this sudden. She shut the doors to the public pathway, checking every camera angle at once. But one camera showed something she didn't expect. A small figure in a bright rain jacket moving quickly down the walkway toward the primate building. Emma. Her mother ran behind her, calling her name. But Emma's stride didn't break. She walked as if she had no fear of the storm, no fear of the thunder, no fear of the gorilla, whose panic had turned his enclosure into a cage of pacing shadows and trembling breaths. Lauren's heart dropped. Get her out of there. But before any staff member could reach the hallway, Emma was already standing in front of the viewing window. Rain pulled at her feet, soaking her boots. Her hood dripped with water, her hair stuck to her forehead. She placed both palms on the glass. Moke didn't notice her at first. He was too lost in the spiral of fear, too consumed by the thunder that pounded the world into fragments around him. He slammed his shoulder into the wall again, his breath ragged. He pressed both palms against his head, shaking as if trying to force the memories away. Then Emma whispered, not loudly, not urgently, but with the gentle steadiness of someone who understood storms in ways adults often forgot. It's okay, Makanu. I'm here. He froze. The storm outside did not. Thunder cracked so violently that even the thick walls of the enclosure vibrated. Wind whipped branches that slammed against the roof. Rain turned the world beyond the glass into a blur. But Moke's trembling stopped. He lifted his head, whites of his eyes stark in the dim light. He looked toward the window, toward the tiny figure who stood resolute under the weight of the elements. His breathing slowed by degrees. His shoulders loosened. The panic in his movements shifted into something quieter, something questioning. He took one step toward her. Everyone in the monitoring room gasped. They had seen Moke move toward people before, but never like this. Never with such caution. Never with such raw vulnerability written into every muscle of his body. Another bolt of lightning tore across the sky. Moke flinched his foot, catching on the ground. But instead of retreating as he always had, he moved forward again. Step by trembling step, guided by something stronger than fear. Something that anchored him even as a storm clawed at the walls. Emma didn't move. She kept both palms against the glass, her eyes locked on his. Makanu reached the window. His chest rose and fell. His lower lip quivered. His breath fogged the glass between them. He slowly lifted one massive hand and pressed it to the surface, aligning it with hers. Rain poured, thunder screamed. The world beyond them shook. But for Makanu, the storm had finally found an answer. Emma stood grounded and unafraid, tethering him not with words, but with presence. Pure, unwavering presence. It was the first time in his life that a thunderstorm did not break him. The first time fear did not drag him back into the darkness. The first time he chose something stronger than memory. When the worst of the storm finally passed, Makanu did not disappear into the shadows. He remained where he was, hand against the glass, breathing slowly. Emma lowered her palms at last, stepping back, only when her mother came to gather her. But Makanu's eyes stayed on her until she turned the corner and vanished from sight. In the observation room, staff stared through the monitors with silent awe. No one attempted to explain what had happened. No one tried to reduce it to instinct or conditioning or coincidence. Some moments weren't meant to be dissected. Some were meant to be felt. That night, as rain still dripped down the metal gutters and thunder faded into distant echoes, Moke did something he had never done before. He lay down near the window and slept calm, still unafraid. The storm had changed everything. Not because it revealed his fear, but because it revealed something far greater, the part of him that wanted free from it. Small girl who, without realizing it, had given him the one thing he'd never been offered during a storm. A reason to believe he wasn't alone. In the days after the storm, Makanu's enclosure felt transformed. It was as if the violent thunder that had shaken the zoo had also shaken something loose within him. Something buried too deep for anyone to reach, until Emma stood before him and refused to let him face his fear alone. The change did not happen all at once, but it unfolded with a quiet, breathtaking certainty that left even the most seasoned keepers humbled. Makanu no longer retreated into the darkest corners of his enclosure at opening time. Instead, he remained near the front pane, sitting with the steady stillness of an animal, learning how to breathe differently. When staff approached, he didn't flinch or brace for what memory told him might follow. He watched them instead, his gaze alert, but no longer hollow. Something behind his eyes had awakened something that made Lauren pause each morning with a feeling she didn't know how to describe. Not fear, not tension, something closer to reverence. His aggression decreased further, almost as if the storm had washed away an invisible layer of defensiveness he carried for years. He began exploring his habitat with curiosity rather than anxiety, touching branches he used to ignore, arranging hay beds as though testing new comforts. Even sitting near the smaller gorillas with a towel that surprised everyone. For the first time since his arrival, he joined the troop during feeding time, allowing them to sit within arm's reach. It was affection, not yet, but it was trust. A fragile but unmistakable trust that no one had seen before. And every Thursday, without fail, Emma returned. She came with her sketchbook tucked under her arm or a library book pressed to her chest. She never approached loudly. She never expected Moke to perform. She simply walked to the window, settled herself quietly on the bench or the floor, and let him choose what kind of interaction he wanted that day. Some days, Moke mirrored her movements, following the soft sway of her shoulders or the tilt of her head as she studied him. Other days, he sat with his forehead near the glass, watched her sketch outlines of gorilla forms or quick drawings of the lavender's outside habitat. Once she read aloud from a children's chapter book, her voice barely above a whisper. But Moke remained pressed, close eyes, half-lit as absorbing every sound. Visitors would stop stunned, whispering to one another, unsure whether they were intruding on something sacred. The zoo noticed the shift. Crowds began gathering at Makanu's enclosure more frequently, not for spectacle, but for wonder. People came hoping to catch a glimpse of the gentle gorilla they had seen online, the one who pressed his hand against the glass to comfort a little girl in a storm. Some left messages at the entrance, drawings from children, letters from adults who felt touched by the story, and even a watercolor paint from a local artist depicting a small figure in a raincoat standing before a massive silverback silhouette. The zoo capitalized on the goodwill, but in a way that honored Makanu rather than exploiting him. They created a new program called Quiet Hour, an initiative inspired by Emma's calm presence, a designated time each morning where visitors were encouraged to speak softly, move slowly, and respect the animal space. The primate complex transformed during these hours, filled with hushed footsteps and a peaceful serenity the zoo had never experienced before. And remarkably, Makanu flourished in it. With calm came creativity. Caretakers introduced finger paint activities using safe, non-toxic pigments, a form of enrichment typically reserved for highly social animals. No one expected Makanu to participate, but he did. One morning, he dipped his fingers into blue paint, dragging slow strokes across the canvas provided. He paused often, watching the color spread, then added gentle curves of green and yellow. The result was rough, imperfect, but stunning. A swirl of colors that seemed to express movement or emotion, rather than randomness. The staff displayed it in the visitor center, and within hours offers arrived from local conservation groups wanting to auction it to raise funds for gorilla protection in the Congo. Moke's painting sold for far more than expected, and the zoo announced that every dollar would support habitat restoration and anti-poaching efforts. Meanwhile, Emma's connection with Makanu deepened in ways words struggled to capture. When she approached, his body relaxed in a way that defied everything the staff believed possible for a gorilla with his history. He no longer simply tolerated her presence. He sought it. On days she couldn't visit, he lingered near the window anyway, waiting with a stillness that told everyone he had lived the shape of her absence just as intimately as her presence. The zoo's board invited Emma's family to a private event, a new initiative called Gorilla Awareness Day. They hoped to celebrate conservation, educate visitors, and highlight the profound impact of empathy in animal care. They asked Emma to speak. She was shy at first, clutching her note cards with small hands, her voice soft. But when she reached the podium and saw Moke in the distance, sitting calmly behind the glass, something steadied inside her. He wasn't angry, she said. He was hurting. He just needed someone to wait for him. The crowd fell silent, moved by the simple truth spoken by a child who had managed to reach hundreds of professionals could not. Cameras captured the moment, but none of them fully caught the quiet exchange occurring beyond viewing pain. Moke slowly lifting his hand, placing it against the glass as if acknowledging her words. Emma approached the window after her speech. She rested her palm in that familiar place, and Moke aligned his hand with hers, the glass glowing faintly between them as if illuminated by something neither could name. They stayed that way for a long moment, girl and gorilla, two beings from different worlds connected by something deeper than logic. When she finally stepped back, Moke didn't retreat into the shadows. He remained where he was calm and grounded, watching her as she walked away. In that small act, the staff saw the full arc of his transformation. He had not only survived his past, he had reclaimed his future. Moke, once the ghost of a life defined by pain, now lived with a spirit returned shaped by trust and the smallest hand ever extended toward him. Through storms and silence, fear and gentleness, through presence alone, Emma had given him something no one else had managed to reach, a reason to be whole again. In the end, Makanu's story became far more than a tale about a frightened gorilla and a brave little girl. It became a reminder, quiet but powerful, of the extraordinary things that can happen when fear is met with patience, and brokenness is met with gentleness, and when a single act of kindness is offered without expectation. What Emma gave wasn't magic. It wasn't technique or trick. It wasn't something reserved for experts or professionals. It was the most human thing of all, the willingness to truly see another being, even when the world had already decided he was unreachable. From the moment Moke pressed his trembling hand against the glass during the storm, the lesson became unmistakable. Healing doesn't always begin with strength. Sometimes it begins with vulnerability, being willing to stand in the middle of what scares us, willing to reach towards something we don't yet understand. Emma showed us that courage isn't always loud, dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a child standing in the rain, steadying herself as thunder shakes the ground, offering comfort to a creature everyone else had given up on. Moke too teaches us something essential. Trauma may shape us, but it does not have to define us. For years, his story looked like a closed book written entirely in fear, mistrust, and memories too painful to face. But change doesn't always come from force or correction. Sometimes it comes from the smallest shift, the slightest moment of connection. The gentle presence of someone willing to stay, even when everything inside us is telling us to hide. When Makanu stepped out of the shadows and allowed himself to believe in Emma's presence, it was more than a behavioral breakthrough. It was a declaration that even the most wounded hearts can find their way back when they feel safe enough to try. Their bond reminds us that compassion has no species, no boundaries, no limits. It reaches across glass, across fear, across the invisible lines we draw between ourselves and the rest of the living world. When we choose empathy over judgment, curiosity over fear, patience over frustration, we don't just change others, we change the world around us. We make space for healing, for trust, for connection, the kind that brings out the very best in us. Moke's journey from a creature consumed by past terror to a being capable of trust and creativity is a lesson in resilience. It shows us that progress is not always linear. There are storms, there are setbacks, there are moments that feel impossible. But healing often happens not in leaps, but in small steady steps, just like the ones Moke took toward Emma during the thunderstorm. Every step, every breath, every moment of courage mattered. And slowly, piece by piece, the life he had lost began to return to him. Emma's part in this story reveals something equally profound. You don't need to be powerful, experienced, or older to make a difference. You just need to show up with sincerity. Sometimes the most meaningful impact comes from the unexpected people, those who act from the heart rather than from fear. Her presence in just changed Makanu. It reminded every adult watching that compassion is a choice we can make every single day. And as Moke grew calmer, began painting, and rejoined the rhythms of a troop, he left behind a message for all of us. No creature is too far gone, too damaged, or too lost to find their way back. Sometimes all they need is one moment of being understood. One voice that doesn't shout, one hand that doesn't strike, one person willing to believe they are more than what their pain has made them. That is the true legacy of this story. Not just the bond between a gorilla and a child, but the reminder that healing is possible even in the darkest corner of our lives. If a girl as small as Emma can spark a transformation as profound as Moke's, imagine what each of us could do with the same patience, attention, and heart. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the power of compassion, I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to the channel and support our work so we can continue bringing more meaningful emotional stories like this one. Stories that remind us who we are, what we're capable of, and how love in all its forms can change.